Hey everybody, my name is Zach REDRUP. You're listening to the It's Not a Phase podcast, and today I am joined by Matt Benton, who is a publicist over at Hold Tight. We discuss what a publicist is and does, how he got into the industry, tips for those looking to enter the world of music publicity, tips for bands who are looking to sort out a press campaign, and loads more. Now, if you enjoyed this or any other episode of the podcast and you want to show your support, there's a few ways that you can do that. Number one, leave a rating and review wherever you're listening to this. It takes just a few seconds and it really does help. Number two, share this on your social media, whether that be Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, wherever. Or number three, if you want to go the extra mile, you can pay a little bit each month to join the Patreon, and in return you'll get access to episodes early along with some other perks, or you can pick up some merch from the store. All the links to that and the podcast socials where you can follow us can be found at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. And now with all that out of the way, let's jump right into this week's episode of It's Not a Phase. What's up everybody? Thank you for joining me on this episode of It's Not a Phase, where I'm joined by Matt Benton, who is a publicist at Hold Tight. How you doing, dude?
Good, yeah. Enjoying my slow Monday, working from home. I was at In the Flames. In the Flames? That's a great way to start podcast. Yeah. In the Flames. I was at In Flames last night at Brixton, so it was quite a late one for me on a school night. But yeah, can't complain. How are you, dude?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. Yeah, I'm all right. Did In the Flames have much pyro going on last night?
Funny enough, they had no pyro, which I was a little bit disappointed by. I was like, this is the opportunity for you to be properly in the flames. But no, it was good. One of the things that oddly stood out for me was like how limited the production was. I think that really worked. Like they had two backdrops, and it changed basically halfway through the set. But the way the lighting was set up, you could basically not see the backdrop at all. All the lights were properly forward facing. Like, yeah, it just really suited the music. I think it was quite classic, straight up good old Swedish death metal time, really.
Yeah. No frills, just straight to it.
Well, exactly. But it was a great show. Just an absolutely stacked lineup, and we worked with the two first bands on the bill, Orbit Culture and Imminent. So I was down to see them. But I mean, I've been a fan of like At the Gates and In Flames basically since day. So I was just having a good fanboy of a time, basically.
Do you go into any pits, or you just stand on the side?
I'm too old for that. I'm too old and too industry for that now. I basically stand at the back and nod.
Yeah, beer in hand.
Yeah, beer in hand, like protect my beer. If the pit gets too close to me, I'll just kind of like inch backwards.
Yeah. So, starting off with the basics, in your words, can you explain what a music publicist is and does, and kind of its purpose in the industry as a whole? I mean, I know that kind of could be a big answer, so a brief overview is...
Yeah, brief. I'll try and keep it brief. First of all, the most basic thing, and I always have to correct family, because having done this job for nearly a decade, they still don't know. We don't publish anything. We're not journalists, right? So, if you see an article in Metal Hammer, and when my family says, "Oh, did you write that?" I'm like, no. Basically, what I do, or what publicists do, we're in effect like the middlemen or women between bands or band represented by label and the sort of paying public, like fans of the band, and we kind of like mediate what the band does through the medium of people like you, podcasters, journalists, DJs. Basically, we encourage them to talk about the bands, write about bands, etc., and then publish that in outlets that these fans of the band pick up. And it's essentially, I know some people would disagree with this, but I see it as in essence a form of marketing that goes hand in hand with things like social media advertising, retail marketing, etc. Because ultimately you're just trying to grow the band's fan base by greater exposure on a wider level. So a very basic example, if you open a copy of Metal Hammer or Rock Sound or whatever, and you'll see an interview with, for example, Orbit Culture, who are one of our bands that were playing with In the Flames yesterday. If you open the mag and see that interview, that'll be because me or one of the team at Hold Tight, we've pitched to the editors or journalists at Rock Sound, said, look, here's this band, they're doing well, here's the story, really sex it up, make it seem cool. They agree, they do the piece, they publish it, and then, hopefully we get new fans of the band reading about it going, they sound cool, I'll go and see them play with In Flames. And that's basically it. I mean, there's a lot more subtleties to it, but, its essence is quite straightforward, really.
Yeah.
Just a lot of emails, a lot of talking to people, a lot of, like, unfortunately, a lot of asking the same questions, a lot of similar emails, and always this nagging feeling that you're being very annoying all the time, being like, oh, hi, yeah, me again. Can you cover this band, please? But yeah, that's basically it.
I think that email thing is kind of the same on, many sides of the industry. Like, speaking from my experience, like a journalist, there's a lot of times where I'm emailing saying, hey, is there any chance I can do X, Y, Z with whatever band? Sometimes, get an email back, and, it's kind of part and parcel, isn't it? Like, people get lots of emails.
Yeah. And it's too many emails. Like, the hardest thing, I think, in this job is working out how to cut through, like how you write not just a really kick-ass email, but when someone opens it, they go, like, I really should cover this band because they sound really intriguing. But just finding a way to craft the email that people even open it in the first place. Yeah. Or working out how to send emails to new people that don't hit their spam filters, or working out what time of day or what day of week is best to email people, or whether they actually don't like receiving emails. You have to just, direct message them on Instagram or something. Like, I was talking to a colleague a few weeks ago, and she said she was talking to a DJ, I think it was. And this DJ said, I don't do emails. All the work I do is just on Instagram. I literally just DM people on Instagram and set things up that way. And that just blew my mind. Because I was like, for me, I try and keep that aspect of my sort of online life a bit more personal, I guess. I think maybe it's more old-fashioned, but I try and do stuff on email because it's kind of like passing up. That's me, Matt, a whole tight kind of thing. So when I realized this person, doesn't do email, I was just like, it was useful information to have, basically. But yeah, lots of emails flying about, lots of, especially if you're on the part of a campaign where you're just pitching for album reviews, which is, they're less common than they used to be, but they still serve a purpose, I think. When you're at that stage, it really is just emails asking the same sort of question. It's like, this album's really good. This is what it sounds like. This is why you should cover it. Yeah. Please, basically. Yeah. It's a lot of time at desk, just, asking questions, basically. Yeah.
I've never heard of someone doing, like, just via Instagram or whatever. Like, I'm kind of like you. I like to compartmentalize. Like, my social media is more personal, and then email and LinkedIn is business. And then
exactly. Or at least social media, like, for me, it is mostly personal, and like I choose how much like work stuff I put on it. Whereas emails, it's there just for, I don't have my email address linked to my personal. I use that for other stuff. That's like but it's working out those little details that can really be the difference between I'm going to get through to this person, or I'm not at all. I've had some people only start responding to emails, and it might have only been for like literally 5 seconds at a gig once, but only respond to emails after they met me. So sometimes that's what it takes, or maybe, I don't know, it's after another introduction by someone else over email. Yeah, like everyone's got their own little different quirks, and it's just kind of like navigating that, really. That's one of the great challenges, but also one of the sort of really fun bits about the job. It's kind of like breaking new ground and meeting new people, even if it is completely virtual and just over text.
Yeah, that's true. So what was it that kind of made you want to get involved in the industry, and where did that kind of start? How did you get your first foot in the door?
So I did music at uni, but it was very much like sort of quite a classic music course. So by that, I mean, like, first of all, it dealt a lot with classical music. There was very little in the way of even, generalized popular music, so-called, and a lot of like music analysis and some performance, and so very much like not industry focused. I knew that I wanted to work in music in some form. Back then, I really wanted to get into film composition, or like composing for film and TV. Realized that I wasn't good enough at that, or I didn't quite know enough people have that skill set. So I was kind of thinking about it as I was leaving uni, and I thought it would make sense to work with the music that I've always loved. Yeah. So not classical, not anything in that world. I would, when I would finish my day at uni, I would come back and listen to, Opeth or In Flames or Insomnium. Like, at the time, oddly, a lot of Scandinavian metal, now I think about it. Anyway, so I kind of realized that what I really liked was talking to people about music that they didn't know, and trying to get them into it. Even,
Yeah.
you know, just friends and just like on a fan level being like, oh, you've never heard of this band. Like you should totally go and listen to Between the Buried and Me.
Yeah.
And often, that often didn't work out. But
they're quite hard to get into. So.
They're quite hard to get into. And then I kind of realized, well, actually, that's effectively like music PR. You know, that's basically what being a publicist is. And within a couple of days, I got wind of Basic Records offering out an internship, in essence, just to manage their social media, but also just it's a good chance to meet people, get your foot in the door a little bit. So I applied for that and got that. And that was like August 2013. And Basic was run by Barley, who you've had on this podcast a couple weeks ago. Yeah, who obviously is now at Nuclear Blast / Believe. So he was, in essence, the first person in the industry that I ever met, and he gave me my first break. And, you know, I'll always be indebted to him for that. And it was, it like completely invaluable. I was there for a couple of months, and at the time, Basic shared an office with Hold Tight. So learning the ropes, you know, doing social media stuff and just kind of getting to know people, I basically very quickly just made the transition to doing an internship at Hold Tight and then didn't leave. And here I am like 9 years later, still having not left. And it's been a real joy to be with the company all that long and kind of help it grow and watch it grow. So having gone from intern to, I guess, kind of, you call it like sort of a contracted freelancer / self-employed person, but with Hold Tight, to then account executive, account manager, junior director, and really just kind of seeing it go from 2 people to 3 people when I joined, and now we're 6 or 7 across like 2 or 3 countries and continents, and just, you know, it's really changed a lot. So that's a very, very long answer to quite a simple question, but yeah, so it really was those first couple of internships and just being aware enough to have heard of the internships in the first place. Obviously, the big elephant in the room is the being able to have the internships as well. I think that's it's something that people talk about a lot, and it's an absolutely sort of deserved discussion to have, is the fact that internships have a useful place insofar as they're a way to be able to offer chances to people on a very short-term basis. But the vast majority of internships, because they are unpaid, it's a massive kind of like a massive barrier to entry, I guess.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's something that I think, I don't know, I'm not sure I have the necessary sort of brain power to be able to work out how to square that circle, but I think it's something that the industry definitely does need to kind of sort of reflect on a little bit more and try and plug those gaps somewhat.
Yeah.
But yeah, here I am now, 9 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you talk about the whole internship thing, and I think as well, like, though you get the experience and you get the connections and stuff like that, the fact that it's not paid also makes it kind of difficult, especially like if I'm talking about someone like from my experience, you know, I live in the north of England and London is far away. Yeah, it costs a lot to go there, and then you've got to stay for however long the internship is, and you can't travel back and forth and all that kind of stuff. So it's difficult. I was
reading about this today, not music at all, but funny enough, I think it was in Nottingham, local art gallery in Nottingham today has announced it's gone into liquidation. And last year, I think it got like a £30 million renovation. Right. And that just made me think that, like, if I was like, you know, ruler of the whole world, you know, president of Earth, one of the things I would like to focus on is really decentralizing the creative industries in the UK, because they're so London focused, and they absolutely don't need to be, especially post pandemic. You know, internships don't necessarily need to be as face to face as they were. I mean, there's still the fact that internships are very much the chance to get to know people, your first chance to get to know people. Then obviously being face to face is useful, but I think that impact is somewhat lessened. And yeah, London is too much of a black hole of music, basically, because it's the sort of implication becomes that to make it in music to begin with, you need to be in London, and it's prohibitively expensive, and also it's, you know, it's a long way from so many other important parts of the country. So
yeah, I mean, it's definitely getting better over the years, but I think there's, like you said, there's still a bit of a way to go before it's kind of in a place where it's like, oh, this is suitable for most people who want to kind of take a stab at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But yeah, I hope that is something that continues to kind of like devolve somewhat. But I mean, if you've got good local cultural centres like Nottingham not managing to support good art galleries, as an example, then I don't know. We'll see what the outlook is in the next sort of 5-10 years.
You talked about how, you know, Hold Tight has changed over the years. How would you say the role of a publicist and the way publicity works has changed?
For me, the biggest change is the media landscape has certainly shifted. So about when I was first getting into this, about a decade ago, taking just the UK as an example, there were so many more music outlets that specifically were just online. So we're not talking about print magazines here. And I would guess that the market size now is probably maybe half the size, maybe even smaller than that. So on average, you would quite routinely and straightforwardly be able to do an album campaign, back in sort of 2014, 15, and quite reasonably expect to look at sort of 20, 25 reviews just in the UK, just for onlines. And this kind of ties into the internship thing. A lot of UK media, especially in the sort of music that, we're talking about here, so like heavy alternative guitar focused music, it's niche enough that a lot of these sites do it totally for free. And actually by that, I mean, they do it out of their own pocket, which means it's worse than for free. Actually, it costs these sites to run. So it's not surprising that the market has definitely shrunk. Flip side of that, there are now many more routes to fans. So we spend a lot of time looking at engaging with YouTubers who do like reaction videos and commentary on new videos and albums that come out, with Twitch streamers, media personalities who are on TikTok now. All these platforms that just either completely didn't exist or didn't really exist a few years ago. So our approach has shifted somewhat. It's certainly, I think, less of a quantity focused approach and certainly more quality, which I think is definitely a good thing. So for me, these days, running a good campaign is as much about getting, I don't know, I wouldn't put a number on it, but a handful of really good quality features, whether print or online, and also kind of like really diversify. So if you can get an up and coming band's new video with, a really notable YouTube streamer, for example, and they share it, and suddenly like you get loads of people organically going, oh, well, I discovered you via, I don't know, Nick Nocturnal or Beez's new music show or that sort of thing. And then it's like, it's a little bit more, it feels a little bit more tangible, I guess, and a little bit more, tangible is the right word. Like you always get that kind of thrill when you see people commenting that way, because then it's really just one step towards spotting these fans out in the wild and they're wearing the merch and they're going to the gigs, and you're going, actually, this is turning into a thing. It isn't just stuck in my own sort of PR bubble, getting these reviews and then suddenly moving on to the next album. It's disconcerting and empowering all at once to realize how quickly things can and have changed. And obviously the big elephant in the room is obviously pandemic as well. That really did shift things a lot, whether it's just how we communicate. I'm talking to you on a Zoom call. I hadn't even heard of Zoom in 2019. Or the fact that some outlets have shifted from being totally print focused and now not really print focused and mostly websites. So Kerrang obviously being that one, or whether some mags just didn't survive at all, and then others have sprung up and becoming a lot more sort of a lot more niche and subscriber base. So things are always shifting, and that's another challenge, is kind of staying ahead of that curve, really.
And you mentioned, you've done this, you've been in publicity for like 9 years now, so you must enjoy it. But what is your favorite part of the job?
My favorite part of the job, I'm not sure if I could pick one, but off the top of my head, it's that sense of starting something new with a band, whether or not it's a band that you worked with before and it's a new album or whatever, and you kind of map out the timeline, strategize the album campaign, and you can see all these opportunities and all these ambitions that you're building for yourself. And there's that excitement of potential, and then managing to get something that fits into that. So whether or not it's, I don't know, last year we were working with Powerwolf from our last studio album campaign, and I sat down with colleagues at Hold Tight and at the label and had this realization that the band, we could work a way to pitch for a Metal Hammer cover. And honestly, it was such a long back and forth with Hammer about this cover. It's like, I think it was like 200-300 emails, like just sorting out specifics and, merchandise offerings, because it was a bundle cover. And going from strategizing that to then pitching it, securing it, and then watching it being published. That, I think, is my favorite aspect of this job, is kind of like seeing those abstract thoughts become sort of concrete realizations kind of actually in real life, Yeah.
So you say it's turned from 200-300 emails that are just conversations into an actual physical product that people can grab and read and look at.
And that's the ultimate excitement, is seeing that and then realizing that's just a small part of a much bigger machine. And then the real actualization of that is then, I don't know, seeing that band at a gig, or going to a festival and seeing loads of people wearing, that band's merch, or actually, I have this quite a lot. This kind of, I spoke about it a few minutes ago, this kind of it's quite easy to exist in your own little bubble because we're all so hyper focused on what we do and really locked into specific sort of timelines and working towards release dates, etc. Another favorite thing is realizing that what we do has an impact so much in the real world that it's connected to people who aren't as hyper obsessed about music as we are. So I don't know. I was talking to some friends from school who are absolutely not in music at all. Like they'll work in, I don't know, they're teachers or lawyers or whatever. And one of them was at a gig, and he sent me a picture, and it was someone at the gig wearing a Conjurer long sleeve. And he just sent me that, and he was like, "Oh, do you work with this band, don't you?" And I was like, "Oh yeah." And it was the realization that like someone, just entirely out of my music bubble kind of had that sort of real world impact. That's the stuff that ultimately like that matters. That's why we do what we do, I think.
You mentioned earlier some people outside the music industry assume like publicists publish things, which isn't true. Are there any aspects of the job itself that you would say are most surprising to people that aren't aware of like what is a part of the job?
I think the more general answer is I think people are surprised that the job is as mundane as it is. And I don't want to be negative here, but I think when especially new people that I'm meeting and I say, "Oh yeah, no, I work in the music industry," they're all like, "Oh, that's cool. That sounds like a really cool job." And I'm like, "No, it is. Especially for all the reasons that, I've just said. It's vibrant and exciting and full of life and potential. But it is mundane. It is, sending all those emails and actually sometimes not getting a huge amount back and dealing with that sort of existential crisis of, there's no one like me, or am I being annoying, or am I just howling into the void?" So I think to an extent it's that aspect. And then just kind of like, I think it's just dealing with that sense of really just trying to constantly try and get through to people who actually just might not get back to you at all. I think it surprises people. Like I talk to real world people quite a lot. So non-music types, basically. Like,
real world people.
Yeah. And I'll say, "Oh, I was contacting this person, and I know that they like the band, and I know that they've covered them before, and I know this is the right email for them, and I know that they're probably going to see it, and I just haven't got a response yet, and I'm trying to work out why." And they're just like, "Oh, that's weird." And I think it is just the nature of the industry, especially at the moment, that everyone's so busy and everyone's so squeezed for time. But yeah, I think ultimately people are just surprised by by how many emails we send and just the nature of just sitting at our desks and just kind of plowing through stuff that way.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it? Like when I was doing the press, I got a few emails every now and then, like saying, "Oh, I'd love to come and do some work experience with you." It's like 8 p.m. Mm-hmm. I've got work first thing in the morning. I'm just sat at my desk in my living room writing stuff up, and it's just strange, like how the lens is different from the outside looking in.
Actually, that's a really good point. I guess that ties into, in a sense, how mundane it is when you go, you're through the looking glass. But yeah, also, I think people who aren't in the know, like you say, and this is a depressing point, I'm always surprised by how, especially in our niche, how little money there is. The fact that, like you said, like people inquiring for Dead Press, like, "Oh, is this a paid role, or can I get work experience, or whatever?" And yeah, like I said earlier, it's kind of a bit disconcerting to realize how much of our corner of the industry is kind of propped up on great people doing great things entirely in their free time, entirely for basically no money at all, or paying it out of their own pocket. And yeah, it is literally shocking. So no wonder people are shocked by it.
Yeah, but it doesn't help as well. Like sometimes I think the industry as a whole kind of overlooks metal. Like if you look at Grammy Awards, most of the time it's bands that have been going for like 30, 40 years. I mean, you've got Turnstile this year, which is good, but not to knock these bands that are getting awards. Like most of them are great, but it's like they've been going longer than I've been alive.
I think that's kind of it's the same point, really. Like metal is a small enough niche that necessitates bands having to have a long and slow growth, because like unless you are a once in a generation exception like Spirit Box, I would say, like they've blown up so quickly. 20 years ago, okay, not metal in the same way, but Muse blowing up so quickly. It doesn't happen. It really is really rare. So flip side, you have to be a band like, I don't know, I'll go back to another band I mentioned before, like Opeth, for example. They've been a band for 30 years, and it's taken them that long and really developing their style to get to the size of being a band, playing sort of Wembley Arena, Roundhouse, Royal Albert Hall, really kind of scaling up in that sense. And yeah, there's always this kind of constant tension, I think, especially in heavy music media, between, oh, metal's doing really well, it's thriving, look at all these bands who are actually, you know, hitting the charts now, versus being really proud of the fact that it's underground and a niche, you know, not a mainstream thing. And I always think it's really interesting kind of balancing those two. And like in some ways it is mainstream, or at least the influences of metal are kind of creeping around the edges of the mainstream. Like the UK, the best example, Bring Me at the moment, like, okay, they're not metal anymore, but they're kind of helping push unusual bands a bit more into the limelight, and also kind of extending those, I guess, kind of like quote unquote alternative influence, kind of putting them a bit more into the, you know, into the mainstream sphere, and helping bands which otherwise wouldn't have been as heavy slightly, you know, cherry pick those aspects. And the fact that, you know, that a band like Bring Me, who are in metal terms still young, and they are literally mainstream, and they are quite, you know, sort of cool and youth. This makes me sound really old, but the fact that they're, you know, they've now finally got the nod to headline Download, for example, I think is, you know, that's a really good shout. But yeah, but in the grand scheme of things, yeah, you compare the streaming figures of most established metal acts, bands that we think of as certainly big or at least significant, you know, bands playing, let's say, Brixton Academy size. Look at those stream figures and then compare them to like most other genres, like R&B, hip hop, grime, indie, alternative, even, you know, a bit more mainstream emo type stuff, and like they're just dwarfed, you know, like the figures are just not in the same realm. So it's like, yeah, it's this constant tension. I think it's fascinating, but I wouldn't want to work in another world of music unless there was something like hugely grabbing about being able to work in really exciting stories, because this is the music that I love. This is my bread and butter, you know, to be able to stand at the edge of a circle pit and just nod along and like not really get involved. That's exactly my jam.
Now, I'm sure this, you know, differs for each different publicity company, but for Hold Tight, what's the general process of bringing on a band or a client and, you know, starting to work with them on a campaign?
I'll try and keep this short because I could talk about this for hours. It depends on who we're talking to. So if it's a very young new band and they're unrepresented, by which I mean unsigned or self-managed, then they might come to us a slightly different way. So maybe it's just it's a general approach by them emailing one of us direct, or, you know, to our main inbox, but a bit more speculative. Or it will be a band that we've worked with before, or with a label that we work with closely. So if it's the former, then there'll be quite a bit of back and forth in terms of working out whether or not they are a band that we can take on. So there are certain criteria we always think about, like, first of all, what they've done and what they're doing. So past, present, and future. So showing that they're building on and have momentum. Whether the music is obviously any good, that helps. Slightly different, but kind of the same. Whether the music actually is something that we can sell, we can pitch, you know, we can work with. So, you know, there are plenty of bands that I've come across that I'm like, oh yeah, I'd listen to this in my spare time. But then I also think, I don't know, I either don't know where I would pitch this, or I don't feel like I have the skill set to pitch it in the areas that it deserves. Yeah. Or I would think it's good, but probably not unusual or good enough in the right way to pitch. So there's all that. If the band satisfies those criteria, then we agree terms. So that's obviously budget and money, where we'd work. So obviously we're a UK centered and focused publicity company, but we work all over the world. So we do a lot of stuff in the States and across Europe, and then further abroad. So like a little bit into Australia, etc. So yeah, we agree money, we agree territories, and we kind of sort of outline what we do. And I think that's very important as well, because one of the most key things about any campaign is managing expectations, as we think of it. So, you know, we have lots of, especially newer, small bands, lots of bands coming to us and being like, oh, you know, we really want a feature on Metal Injection. And I'm like, probably not going to get a feature on Metal Injection. Like, if you're lucky, might get a premiere, maybe, or like we can try and eventually like get them to start sharing the news if we put out, you know, your next video or something, and kind of explain to them why it won't happen. So that's for a newer band. And then the vast majority of what we do these days is either retainer work with labels or a lot of consistent work with the same clients. So here's a good example. Last week, for example, I had a band come back to me via the label they're on. I worked their last album, which came out in early 2020, just before pandemic. So I already know the band, know the sort of music they do, know the label. So I really get on with the people at that label, so I know that expectations wouldn't really need to be managed in the same way. And because they're signed to a label, there's just a bit more general structure and a bit more setup. So a lot of the initial conversations don't really need to happen in the same way. So it was a lot more straightforward. They emailed and they said, oh, this band's coming back. They've got a new album coming out in March. Would you like to work it? Here's a link if you want to listen. And I was just like, I listened to it and I just went, yep, great, cool. So it was quite straightforward to then agree terms because they would have been the same as before. And away we went. I told you this would be a long answer. So then from that point, we basically make sure we have everything that we need. And by that, I mean like all the material to undertake a PR campaign. So for an album campaign, that basically means music, obviously. For the album itself, all the audio files and MP3. For singles, they need to be high quality WAV files because obviously they need to be have slightly better audio fidelity to be played on the airwaves. Obviously, good promo shots, and I can go into more detail on that in a sec because don't get me started. Album cover, single cover, and a good bio, and that's basically it. Really, we need information from the band so we can then start to get a sense of what the album's about and what the band are about, and really kind of like almost become a sort of another member of the group and really inhabit their world, like visual aspects and music, and then away we go really. But promo pictures. I think this will be quite useful for some people to hear because it surprises me how even now how often I have to have this conversation. But please, bands, if you're out there, make your pictures interesting. Like if you are a generic metal band and you're 4 beardy guys who are all between 25 and 35, don't just have a photo of you, I don't know, stood next to a garage door staring at the camera looking moody. Don't have all your pictures in black and white. Just try and make it a bit interesting and have a bit of personality and your visual aspect. I think this is something bands struggle with. Like, some can be amazing musicians and their talents be in music. The unfortunate reality of being a band these days is that you have to do so much yourself. You can't just you have to be good at social media. You have to be good at least linking up with people who can provide you things like good merch designs. But if not, you have to be a good graphic designer yourself. But you also have to have a good eye for the visual aspect, which means good promo pictures. And yeah, I mean, I've had plenty of good feature opportunities not happen because I send over the pictures to the editor and they're like, we can't print these. It's not even that they're offensive or obscene or anything, they're just dull. And then I go back to the band and I'm like, well, do you have any more photos? And then they say, no. Pictures are almost as important as the quality of music, really, which might surprise some people to hear. And yeah, in terms of the information that we received from the band, it was, I think, surprising to hear that so many bands don't have bios. And I'm like, how can you be in a band and not have an easily accessible bit of text? I'm talking like a couple of hundred words that you can just send to anyone who needs it to just give an overview of what the band are about. It doesn't have to be an essay. It doesn't have to be winning any Pulitzer Prizes. It just needs to, like, good bios can be quite basic. For me, it's really a sense of what are the band's influences? And I don't just mean, who do they sound like musically, but I'm like, what gets the band ticking? Like, why do they write about what they write about? What inspires them? Then, obviously, who do they sound like? What have they done? And what are they doing? And that's literally it. If a band comes to me and goes, oh, well, last year we toured with Lamb of God and Killswitch. This year we're going out with, like, Mastodon. We sound a little bit like Mastodon, but also a little bit like, I don't know.
In the Flames.
In the Flames, whatever. Yeah. Pick a band. And then they can say, and our album is, inspired by, I don't know, like, Hunchback of Notre Dame, and like it's a concept album, and the vocalist's a hunchback, and I'm like, okay, cool, that's a bit interesting, but it's actually something. Yeah. And we've worked with bands that we're tied to, and I say to them like, okay, cool, your album's coming out in 10 weeks. Can you send me your bio? And they're like, we don't have one. And I'm like, if you don't have a bio, how am I expected to begin selling who you are and what you do? Because I don't know that, and especially if I can't go and find it online because you've never had a bio, it suddenly becomes this kind of sense of, I don't know, like why aren't you trying to sell yourself a little bit more, Sorry, I turned into a bit of a rant. These things, like, they've really bugged me because I have a slightly different perspective on it because I've been doing this a while now, but I don't think this stuff is difficult. I think these are the basics, and this is why, like, I say, if there's anyone out there listening this is the stuff that you should have ready to go before you start approaching the people you want to work with. And some of the best emails we get through our generic info at email inbox, they might be completely speculative, but it'll be a band saying, hi, hold tight, this is our information, this is what we're doing. Emails like that are a total joy compared to the opposite, where it's like, oh, hi, we want to work with a publicist. And I'm like, if that's all the email is, then I don't have the time to go back and be like, who are you? Because if that's how you're emailing people, then that's like maybe not a red flag, but certainly like a yellow flag being like, no, this isn't good enough. So.
Yeah. Well, you were talking about promo pics before. I think what some bands don't like to think about is that having a band is a business. You have to brand yourself. You have to market yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So and having a generic photo, yes, it's a photo, but how many other bands have a similar photo, and how are you sticking out from the sea of bands that are doing the same thing? Yeah,
exactly. Which is why I think as long as you can do it tastefully, having a bit of an edge in terms of quote unquote a gimmick is actually, I think, a good thing. So we've worked with, in various shapes and forms, we worked with Sleep Token since the very beginning, very, very beginning. And that band has always had the same visual idea, that sense of complete anonymity, and that sense of that masked aspect. And obviously masks are not new. In heavy music, masks have been around basically since as long as there's been heavy music. But it was the aggressively pursuing that complete sense of anonymity that I think in part has really worked for Sleep Token, because it makes people really, it's interesting actually, it makes people either really curious, or I have this sense that if ever the identity of the vocalist is leaked, I think a lot of people would actually just look the other way because they want to keep being involved in that sense of anonymous sort of cult worship. Anyway, that's a long way to say it. Like, one of the things that has always worked for the band is that they always have looked really cool, and they stick out. The promo shots stick out. Similarly, like, we've just come off cycle with this really wicked black metal band called Gaera, Gaerea. And again, they're all masked. They kind of look a bit similar to Sleep Token, to be honest, but it helps with the mystique of the music, and it just means that the promo shots are just a little bit easier to do. While I'm on this subject, just name drop, shout out Harriet, who released their debut EP this year. One of the things I really love about Harriet is, even at this early stage, they just look wicked. And that is like mostly down to their photographer / videographer, Harry Steele, who is just, I think he's like doing some of the best work of like sort of newer photographers in our scene. And it really helps that he's basically with them for everything. Yeah. So they're very good at turning around really good looking live shots. So they'll play a gig, and then within like half an hour they'll be up on their Instagram. Or they went and played Soul Crusher Fest, which was in the Netherlands a couple of weeks ago, and they had a spare few minutes, hour or so managed to get some really good new promo shots just because they had the time and Harry was out of them. And it's that kind of that having that image awareness as much as anything. So it's not just get good promo shots, but it's like you say, being in a band is also building that brand, and it's just constantly kind of like keeping that at the forefront of your mind and making sure everything is kind of like has that sort of 360 vision. Yeah. Very important.
So you've given advice on, bands that want to get into publicity and just being a band in general. What advice would you give to someone who wants to get involved in a role in music publicity?
First of all, get to know lots of people. Like, it's a very small scene, and everyone knows everyone. So if you start to, get to know people and be nice as well, just always like be nice, be reliable, be someone that people want to work with, then that really helps. And then keep your eyes open for that first foot in the door opportunity, whether or not it's like a junior role that's going. It is very rare because it's just the state of the size of our company at whole time. But there have been a couple of opportunities in the last few years where we had, as well as, or instead of offering internships, like with job ads for, the very most junior role in publicity. So foot in the door opportunity that isn't just internships. So keep eyes out for that. There is also a lot that you can do yourself. You can just strike out on your own, just try and get into, publicity. If you are, if you know a couple of really good local bands and they don't have representation and you're friendly with them, and a couple of really keen freelancers who maybe, know a couple of editors, it wouldn't take long to start building stuff up if you are, known for having a good ear and representing good artists, being reliable to work with, and, just being generally conscientious. That also helps. I think it's just a mixture of that, really. Just kind of I am always a bit surprised by sometimes a lot of basic mistakes that are made by other people. I mean, no slight on them. It might be a time of year thing because everyone, like I said, is a bit tired and a bit burnt out. And as a result, everyone's trying to do too much. But if you routinely are on it enough and conscientious enough, you don't make these mistakes, then I think also that people will at least notice that. So because it is what we do is a very community focused thing, it's really just become a part of that community, become really, known. And the other thing is, like, a lot of this advice is applicable the other side of the fence, for newcomer journalists. Like, even in the last sort of 3-4 years, I've noticed so many new journalists doing really good stuff just because they've barged their way in. They've become reliable, made it quite quickly apparent that, they are talented with words, and they get to know people quickly. And that really helps. That was certainly kind of my approach when I very, like, back in the dark ages when I started in this, was just get into the scene, get to know people. And obviously this is all that everyone's talking about at the moment, but back then Twitter really helped. Like, I got to know people using the more social aspect of that social network. And that's how I kind of was initially aware of Basic Records and some of the team at Basic/Hold Tight, especially Lisa, my colleague at Hold Tight, who exists on Twitter, very much so. And yeah, just kind of getting to know people, even if it's virtually, and then also just ride your luck. A lot of it is luck, unfortunately. Yeah,
it's a competitive industry, like, no matter what kind of role you want to get into.
It is. It's this curious tension between being intensely competitive, because everyone's really wanting the best for everyone that they work for. So there's only so many. Well, there's only sort of, like, take just a very obvious example. There are only so many top 40 places, right? Literally, mathematically. So everyone's really competitive in that sense. But then also, because it's a small scene, and a lot of people still these days are quite nice, like, everyone wants the best for everyone else as well. So it's kind of like there's a lot of favors being done, a lot of people helping each other out, but ultimately you're also all competing for similar prizes. And especially with the cost of living crisis and how the market is shrinking somewhat, the prizes are arguably getting smaller, or at least, the potential number of fans that you can reach who, would have spent, say, again, just dealing with round numbers, like, say you've got a hypothetical fan who per month spends £30 on records. The number of fans who can do that, say 4 years ago, probably not the same number now, or at least maybe their spending patterns are a bit different. So everyone's kind of going for the same goals, but the goals are shrinking, and the number of people who are competing for those goals is also expanding because there's now so much music. Oh my god! Like, what was the milestone pass the other day? 100,000 songs uploaded to Spotify a day.
Insane.
But it's too much to handle. So that's the other thing. It's like, we live in this great sort of golden age of musical choice, but that does come at a great cost. So it's all part of the fun of it. It's all like trying to get those little bits where you're like, that really helps the band stand out, and I'm really glad to push them along in that way.
So what bands are you working with at the moment that you think people should check out?
Oh, I love and hate questions like this, because I'm like, how do I choose? How do I begin to narrow it down? So first of all, to leap out, just because I saw them last night, Orbit Culture and Imminence, two very good new Swedish metal bands, but quite different. So Orbit Culture, a bit more sort of classically, like, melodic death metal, which makes sense given they're playing with, In Flames. Also, they remind me a little bit of, like, mid-era Metallica and Trivium, so it's kind of that good sort of classic sound. Imminent are on the more metalcore side of things, and I think it's the first time I've ever seen this. Their vocalist is also a violinist, and he plays violin and sings at the same time.
That's true, yeah.
Which I'm like, that's great, that's cool. Already briefly mentioned, but yeah, Harriet released their debut EP in April. I should know this. Amazing. Earlier this year. Yeah. April. Honestly, there's so much music this year. Once something's out, I'm like, it was just in the past now. And yeah, I've got so much time for those guys, like, because they're just, again, it's the same thing. They're just really nice people to work with, and the music's, like, really cool, quite different. And yeah, if you're into, like, really nasty, manky metal with a core edge, or flip side, hardcore with a metal edge, with quite a lot of industrial thrown in, easy, cheap comparisons, I guess, are like Code Orange, Nails, that sort of thing. Ithaca's second album, which came out in July, is absolutely bonkersly good. Like, incredible. Conjurer as well. Like, lots of, like, really stand up like new younger metal bands doing really well. On the other side of the spectrum, I work with Highland at the moment, and in a way they don't really need a shout out as much because they're much bigger. But if you're into very transportive music, which is heavy on like, I guess, an emotional primal level, but not like sonically heavy, then they're for you. Like, I don't know, if you like the soundtrack of things like The Northman or Vikings, then yeah, there'll be few. The part of the issue is, like I said, 100,000 songs a day. There's, I could be here all day, like shouting out bands that I work with that I think are doing great stuff. Ultimately, I'm really drawn to obviously the music being really good, like music like, and again, Ithaca's album They Fear Us. It's the sort of record, partly also because it's only 35 minutes long. I mean, shout out bands who know when to stop. But I listened to that record and I get to the end and I'm like, I could listen to that again. I could just stick that on again. So like, obviously it helps that the music's really, really good, but also for me at the moment, it's just having good stories to tell. So on the Ithaca campaign, that's partly why I really loved working with them this year. There was so much, they felt like, this is an overused word, but I think it's right here. Like, they felt like vital stories and like narratives to put out. So recently did a really good piece with Alt Press on fatness and femininity in heavy music and how it's something that's not really discussed about. And I thought that was just like so much more useful and interesting than just interview with a band talking about their new album. Like, oh, it's, it's both heavier and more melodic, all those cliches. And yeah, another band I'm working with on and off at the moment, an Indonesian trio. I guess you call it like sort of on the sort of more funk alternative metal side of things, but they completely just sound like themselves. They're called Voice of Batch Prop, and they're really interesting group to work with because they're from a more socially and musically conservative part of the world where, especially if you're female, playing heavy music is just not really a done thing. So that in itself becomes a bit of a, I can't think of a better word, but like a righteously good story to tell. And it just helps that the music's like, it's very much their own. So yeah, like shout out lots of bands that are good to work with, have good stories to tell, and musically are inspiring. I wish I had half the talent that they do.
And have good promo shots as well.
And have good, ultimately, that's the most important thing. Forget about the music, just have good promo shots. Yeah.
Well, thanks very much for talking to me, Matt. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your work day.
It's been really cathartic to be able to have a good get some of this off my chest. But no, I hope it's been useful for people who are listening. And yeah, just thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure to spend an hour effectively talking about myself.
Yep. Well, before I let you go and tackle your inbox again, any final words, anything you want to say, plug that you've not had a chance to in the chat?
No, I don't think I'd use the time to plug anything. Obviously, then just shout out Hold Tight, the work we do. If you're in a cool band with a good story to tell, just give us an email, info@holdtight.co or matt@holdtight.co. But other than that, I mean, without self-promotion, like, I'll just go back to what I said. Like, if you're conscientious and nice and just get on with people, then hopefully you'll do well and go far. So nice positive note to end on.
Nice. Yeah. Thanks very much, mate. Appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, you too. All right.
Bye. And that's it. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please consider supporting the podcast in any way that you can. We have a Patreon where you can get access to each episode a week early, along with some other perks, a merch store, or you can leave a review wherever you're listening to this. You can also follow me on social media or subscribe to the newsletter where I'll send out each episode to you via email, along with regular playlists. All of this can be found at itsnotaphase.co.uk. That's itsnotaphase.co.uk. Thanks again for listening, and remember, it's not a phase, it's a lifestyle.